Welcome back, everyone, to the Jake Broe Show. Today on the channel, we have returning guest, retired Lieutenant General Ben Hodges. He is kind of a hero figure to me on social media. I really appreciate his posts and his commentary. He is very generous with his time, doing lots of interviews across all these YouTube channels. General Hodges, thank you so much for returning. How are you doing today?
Jake, well, thank you very much for the privilege of coming back on your program. I love watching it. I'm doing good. You know, Army's 250 years old and a day.
250 years young, I think you mean.
Okay.
Hopefully, our military can endure for centuries more, and 250 is just the beginning. So we're going to launch into it because we scheduled this interview weeks ago, but the breaking news as of this weekend is Israel's first strike on Iran's nuclear facilities. Now, I understand in the conflict, when I use the word first strike, people get upset and there's been back and forth going forever. Iran has committed itself to the destruction of Israel. So Israel, in a way, is acting in self-defense. But my question for you concerning this hostility is, do you think Israel would have launched this first strike if Russia was at full strength? If Russia hadn't been bogged down for the last 3.5 years fighting in Ukraine? Famously, back in January, Putin signed this 20-year mutual defense agreement with Iran, supposedly committing to their mutual defense. But I don't see Russia taking any action to try and stop Israel or intervene in any tangible way. So I'm curious for your opinion. Would Israel have made this move if the Russian military wasn't currently depleted and bogged down in Ukraine?
You know, I don't know the answer to the hypothetical, but this is a continuation of Russia's failure as an ally. I mean, they pretty much abandoned Armenia when Azerbaijan was kicking their rear end back just a few years ago. They were zero help to Syria here last year, and now obviously they were zero help to Iran. And so that should be a message to those who are depending on Russia or are assuming that Russia has these superpowers when, in fact, they probably don't. Now, I think Israel, maybe to the point of your question, Israel has tried to have it both ways when it comes to Russia. They haven't been as forward leaning to help Ukraine as I think they should have been for whatever the reasons are. But certainly they must have seen or felt confident that they were not going to face any kind of serious retaliation from Russia after this strike against Iran.
At the moment, Donald Trump is trying to play dumb, saying, I had nothing to do with this attack on Iran. The United States is not involved. Please don't bomb our embassies and military bases in the Middle East. And I just want to get your thoughts and reaction. Do you think potentially Iran might try and strike at a U.S. Embassy or U.S. military base in the Middle East? Is Iran they're going back and forth. I was checking the reports this morning. Ballistic missiles are hitting Tel Aviv. Obviously, Israel's Air Force is decimating the Iranians right now. This is not something that I think is going to go away in the next 48 hours. I think this is a sustained air war, back and forth. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is called for regime change. He is putting out public addresses urging the people of Iran to rise up and overthrow their governments. So my question to you is, can the United States really just stay out of this? I know the U.S. Air Force is shooting down missiles targeting Israel, but I've not heard any reports of the U.S. military striking Iranian targets. Do you think this will hold, or do you think the United States is going to get drawn into this war?
Well, to me, the question is not can we sit it out? Of course you can, but should we? I mean, here's an opportunity uh, to bring about a significant change in the Middle East by taking advantage of what Israel has already done to not only destroy Iran's the potential for them to make nuclear weapons, but to create the scenario where Iranians could finally overthrow the regime. Now, I am, the U.S. We've got a not a very good history when it comes to regime change. So I'm not talking about us trying to insert somebody in there. But it's clear that the Iranian people have been suffering under this regime for 50 years. And so I would say this is not something we should try to avoid if we were able to not only decapitate Iran's ability to threaten its neighbors or us or Israel, but also where the population might feel this is their chance to finally throw off the yoke of the Ayatollahs. Now, of course, Iran has been attacking us through their proxies, through the Houthis, for example, going after ships in the Red Sea, and they've come after us in the Persian Gulf over the years. I would certainly expect that they are considering whether or not it would be useful to come after targets, American targets somewhere in the Middle East. Um, but that'll be driven, I think, not by their assessment of our capabilities, but by their assessment of our president. Um, I think right now, we don't look very strong. I mean, the fact that the Israelis did this without telling us um, directly that okay, it's going in the next 24 hours is an indicator of another problem. Just like the Ukrainians didn't tell us before the spider's web operation, the Israelis did not, I think, give us specific indicators of what they were about to do or use American assets for the offensive part. And I think that's because they don't trust us either. So it really boils down to, and I'm kind of talking around your question, it's that despite the best efforts of U.S. Central Command, I just don't think that we have a strategic, we don't even have the organization at the top of the administration. And you've got one guy as Secretary of State and National Security Advisor and running USAID. You've got a Director of National Intelligence who is incompetent and also a significant security risk, and a Secretary of Defense who is incompetent and more interested in other things. I don't know that we have a strategy for what we really would like to achieve in the Middle East, specifically with Iran, but even with Israel.
I saw reports from Strelkov, Igor Gherkin. Putin put him in jail 2 years ago, but he still puts out his analysis of what's going on in the war. And he was saying how this is bad for Russia. If Iran de-evolves into civil war or revolution, uh, Iran is Russia's southern corridor. They ship materials, oil and gas from Astrakhan through the Caspian Sea. It has to go overland through Iran to get to markets in India and the Indian Ocean. So if Iran de-evolves into chaos, honestly, I do have compassion for the Iranian people. I don't think this would be a pleasant time. The last 50 years have not been great under the mullahs, but civil war or revolution is often violence. But can you think of what impact this will have potentially on the war with Ukraine if Russia is no longer allowed to use the land corridor, the southern corridor through the Caspian Sea, through Iran to get their oil or whatever they're selling to the Indian Ocean?
So, a great question, and you framed it up very well. I don't know that it's, as I look at it, that it's a clear black and white answer. On the one hand, this turmoil in Iran and in the Gulf will cause oil prices to go up, which helps Russia. When the opposite is what we want to get the prices way down so that it wrecks their oil and gas industry and their ability to make money from selling oil to China and India and other customers. On the other hand, it can't be good for Russia if Iran is not under the control of a friendly regime, exactly the way you just described it. For those reasons, and Iran and Russia have had I mean, going way back to the time of Persia, there's always been this sort of relationship, especially with the Iranians. I don't know that Russia gets much from Iran. And, I mean, they're already making the drones. So the Shahed drones, which were this super effective drone in the early days, the Russians are making their own now. So I don't know how much they get from them. I think there have been some ballistic missiles that were provided. But I can't tell honestly how much of a source of weapons and ammunition Iran is for Russia. So that could have an effect. I don't know how much. Um, but anything that I think helps lead to the isolation of Russia, the further isolation, to box them in, limits their ability to do things, to conduct horizontal escalation against Ukraine or against the West, I would be for that. But again, I think the Trump administration is unwilling to take bold steps here because I think there are some considerations they have vis-a-vis Russia that they see Putin would probably not want the U.S. to help Israel to go ahead and finish off the regime.
You mentioned already the success of Operation Spiderweb. This was about 2 weeks ago now. So, can you talk about what impacts this has on Russia's nuclear triad? Russia's bomber fleet is about 120 planes. They're not capable of producing new planes. These planes were all produced under the Soviets. Some of these planes were built in Ukraine. Russia has prioritized upgrades and maintaining the lifespan of these planes, but potentially 40 were damaged and destroyed. This is almost a third of their nuclear bomber fleets. What impact does this have on Russia's strategic reach across the globe? And potentially, if you want to zoom in, you can talk about what impact this has on Ukraine.
So, I think the three big takeaways of that operation for me that were so interesting and impactful were number one, this was a classic example of killing the archer. I mean, these bombers were delivering cruise missiles against Ukrainian civilian targets. That Kinzhal's being launched against Ukrainian cities, not military targets, just killing innocent Ukrainian civilians. So if there's a reduction of whether it's a quarter to a third of their ability to do that, that's a good thing. That's a bunch of archers that are now taken off the board, less capability for launching missiles, although obviously some of that capability exists. Secondly, you're correct. There's not new Bear bombers coming off the assembly line. I mean, there is a finite number of these, and I would imagine, based on my assessment of Russian maintenance of equipment overall, I would be willing to bet that the remaining are probably not in great shape anyway, and that they're probably having to do a lot of cannibalizing just to keep aircraft in the air. So now they've even lost some of that capability. And when you start taking countermeasures to protect what you have left, usually that includes dispersal, which makes it even more difficult to do maintenance on aircraft when you have to start pushing them away, and then therefore you have to disperse the maintenance capability as well. So there's a lot of excellent knock-on effects that the Ukrainians achieved against Ukraine's bomber force. Now, the other thing that really struck me, it's a little bit psychological, both for Ukrainians but also for the Russians. There is no longer a single square kilometer in Russia that's unreachable. I mean, they can either, it's certainly in the minds of the Russians that everywhere can be hit by some kind of a drone, whether it's a long range drone, maybe not carrying such a large payload, or some other means, the Ukrainians are going to get there. And so that's got to have a psychological effect. Remember, in the Second World War, as the German Wehrmacht was moving closer and closer towards Moscow and Stalingrad, the Soviets moved so much of their industry to the other side of the Ural Mountains, to the east of the mountains, to protect it. There is no virtual Ural Mountain anymore that can protect them. Everything is within reach. So this is going to cause them to have to look at force protection, dispersal of air defense, um, and they've got to be wondering, just like after the Mossad took out so much of Hezbollah with those pagers, the Russians have got to be looking at how did we get penetrated like this? I mean, it just seems like the GUR is able to go pretty much wherever they want inside Russia.
So, once again, Operation Spiderweb was 2 weeks ago, and Putin vowed his revenge. Trump had a phone call with Putin, and Trump acted as his press secretary, announcing that Russia would have to respond. And I'm genuinely curious, like, did the response already happen? I know the Russians blew up the regional Capitol building in Kherson, and they've been bombing the city of Kharkiv, and they've been bombing Kyiv, 500 drones and missiles in a single night. But that was already, in my opinion, what Russia was doing and
Yeah.
what Russia was going to do anyways. So did the response happen and I just can't tell what it is? Or is Russia still planning something? The chatter is some, people in the Russian chain of command want to have a demonstration of their power. They want to deploy or use a tactical nuke on the battlefield somewhere, maybe try and hit an airfield with a Kinzhal missile or something. So I just want to get your thoughts on the potential use of a tactical nuclear weapon. Is this something the Russians are seriously considering, or is it something they would ever do?
So another great question. Of course, I can't possibly know all the capabilities that they still have remaining, um, but it's hard to imagine that they've got some really huge thing that they're saving to launch in retribution. And the whole notion of of they must respond or there must be some sort of a retaliatory strike is, of course, nonsense. And it really is incredible to me that our president would even normalize this kind of language and say, well, they have to respond. It's the Ukrainians' fault, as if he has no idea what's been going on for the last 11 and a half years. Um, and really the United States, we're almost a non-factor anymore. I mean, clearly the peace approach by the Trump administration was doomed from the start, and it's a zero now. And he's bragging about getting a birthday call from Vladimir Putin yesterday. So I don't see anything positive, unfortunately, coming from the United States anytime soon. Now, the Russians, I think there probably is always a faction or part of their inside their leadership, their general staff, the influencers, if you will, that want to use a nuclear weapon. I mean that I think that's always there. Um, but I have always been skeptical of the likelihood because there's no benefit to Russia to use a nuclear weapon. I mean, the only people that seem to be really scared of the use of a nuclear weapon are the Americans and Western Europeans. Everybody that lives on the east flank, if you will, that lives next to Russia, they don't seem as scared or worried about it, even if they did do it. It's almost like, okay, of course the Russians might do that, but what's at stake is too important. And so why would they use it? It would make it very difficult for the Chinese to just look the other way. And even the Trump administration, I think the pressure would be very significant to do something to punish Russia or help Ukraine. Um, I just I've never been so uncertain of my own government's actions as I am right now.
These direct peace talks happening between Russia and Ukraine, mostly in Turkey and Istanbul. Russia sent a low-level delegation. This Medinsky guy, he's can't make any decisions. He's not a real negotiator. Zelensky went to Ankara. He was willing to meet face to face with Putin to come up with a deal like Donald Trump keeps demanding. That didn't happen. The Russians aren't really negotiating. Aside from these POW exchanges, which the Russians were already doing, nothing has come of these talks. But am I missing something? Is there a benefit? Can you think of benefits remaining for Ukraine to continue participating in these peace talks when the Russians are just demanding capitulation? There are no negotiations happening. There are no peace talks. Russia just wants Ukraine's complete surrender. And at the moment, it looks like they're not willing to compromise or settle for anything less than complete regime change and the absorption of Ukraine. The members of the State Duma are calling for a new union state of Belarus, Ukraine, and Russia. They want to merge these territories together and get the Russian Empire back.
So, first of all, I would not refer to them as peace talks because you're exactly right. That's not what they are. The Russians have zero interest in actually any kind of a sustainable negotiation or settlement that is acceptable to all sides. They have zero interest in it. Then they've been very clear about that, and you've laid that out very well. Um, the only benefits that I can think of, and there may be others, but for the Ukrainian side, if it helps get back prisoners, if it turns into a prisoner exchange vehicle, if you will, then that seems to be worth it. For at least for the Ukrainian side, I think there's value in that, and then probably it helps some Western governments if they can. Those that want to help Ukraine, but they're getting pressure from their own population or parliaments, maybe say, "Look, Ukrainians are there. They're there. They're ready to talk. They're ready to do it." So there's some value in that, but I don't think any serious people have real expectations that something significant is going to come out of that. Um, that I think that Russia, I think this war a year from now will look a lot like it does now, unfortunately, unless something really significant externally happens. And I mean, like the West finally we get our act together, with or without the U.S., to use all of our economic power to crush Russia's oil and gas exports, both through taking steps to stop the use of these illegal shadow fleet vessels that are carrying oil out through the Baltic Sea and the Black Sea that goes to India and China. About 70% of Russia's oil goes to India and China. So stop that. And that would make it very, very difficult for Russia to continue doing what they're doing. Um, and then taking steps to get the oil price cap down lower. These are the kind of things I think that will finally get Russia to the negotiating table. The U.S., of course, has stopped this. So that's the other part that we've got to solve is what is it? What is it about our president that keeps him supporting Russia or blocking action that would put real pressure on Russia? I mean, and the Congress continues to sit on their hands, even though Senator Graham goes around bragging that he's got 84 senators signed up for the sanctions package. Majority Leader Thune, they're not going to do anything without Trump's approval. So I think this is a place where European leaders and Canada are going to have to fill in this American gap.
Do you think that President Trump actually understands the causes of this war? My opinion is Trump is genuinely dumb, but he also deliberately plays dumb when he thinks it's convenient for him. And I don't know if you saw this clip. There's so many clips of him saying absurd and stupid things, but he basically said, "Why are we hostile towards Putin when Putin fought on our side in World War II? And yet we fought against Germany and Germany and Japan are now our allies." Like he's at the podium talking to this banquet hall, giving the most kindergarten basic understanding of World War II and our alliance structures. And like, I'm genuinely confused. Does he actually believe what he's saying? Or is he really this dumb? He doesn't understand why we're allies with Germany and Japan against the Russians when Putin fought on our side in World War II. I just have to get your thoughts and reaction.
Well, you've just insulted kindergartens all over America by saying that his assessment was a kindergarten level. I think you couldn't fake it that often and that long to be as ignorant of what really has happened. I watched the other day when German Chancellor Merz was in the Oval Office and Trump said something that made me cringe. It was like, June the 6th. Oh, that must be a really bad day for you guys, Whereas actually 99.9% of Germans alive today see this as liberation from Nazism. So, and he's tone deaf, totally unaware, doesn't, as far as I can tell, for sure, does not appreciate or care about the origin of this war, why Ukrainians fight like they do, that doesn't appreciate the geography And I don't know who's in his ear other than Putin that has caused him to believe all this. And the people around him, Rubio, the son of Cuban refugees, he's very familiar with the Soviet Union and who Russia is. Um, I think that there are people around him that know better, but for either out of fear or power or whatever it is, are not willing to say, Mr. President, you're completely wrong. That's not what's going on here. This is not in our interest. This is not making America great again. And there's enough experienced historians and these old geriatric Republican senators that know what the why Russia is the bad guy, and that they are so ineffective, or else they are living in fear, and they're unable or unwilling to uh, save us from our president.
Since you mentioned our geriatric senators, Senator Chuck Grassley, he's the Senate pro tem. The guy is like 92, 93, 94. He's the longest serving United States senator from the state of Iowa. And I watch clips of this guy and I follow him on Twitter, and I am confused. Why is he doing this? For a younger politician, the concern is I don't want to be primaried. I don't want to lose my seat in Congress. Donald Trump has no problem interfering in the primaries of members of the House and members of the Senate. He just gets rid of people who doesn't do what he says. But when you're 94, what are you holding on to? Why do you think people like Senator Chuck Grassley, who understand the Soviet Union, they understand World War II, like the guy was still alive when World War II was going on, why are they tolerating this? Why are they going along with this? Is it just to hold on to power until they hit 100 years old? Or it's baffling to me. I do not understand it.
Of course, this is a problem on both sides. We've had Democrats also that stayed way too long, and then the party pays a price, and the Republicans will pay a price at some point. But at the end of the day, as uh, annoying and frustrating as it is, the voters get to pick their guy, and if the people of Iowa continue to vote for him, then that is their choice. But you would think that the party apparatus would say, "Look, Iowa friends, this is going to hurt you and us in the long run." Or Chuck, your legacy is going to be you falling asleep in a hearing, face down on your gavel. That's what people are going to remember. Not that you were a great legislator and defender of the republic for all these decades. So I can only guess that maybe the leadership, in the case of the Republicans, are so concerned that they would not be able to keep that seat if it was not Grassley, that the Democrats might actually be able to find somebody that could defeat another Republican candidate. That's got to be part of it. Um, but these guys have families. I mean, at some point there ought to be a crisis intervention to say, Grandpa, come spend time with your grandkids and your great grandkids, and you're hurting us.
The other story this weekend was this military parade. And I understand uh, it was the 250th anniversary of the formation of the United States Army, going back to 1775. I do respect our military and the history and the legacy. I did watch the 3-hour broadcast on C-SPAN, and I enjoy seeing U.S. Army members dressed up in colonial outfits or outfits from the Civil War or World War I or Vietnam. But that's not why Donald Trump enjoys military parades. Donald Trump, since 2017, has been demanding a military parade in his honor. Uh, he sees what Kim Jong Un gets. He sees what Xi in China gets. He sees what Putin gets. He won't shut up about Russia's parades. He even went to France, and France also has military parades. He met with Macron, said, "We got to do this here in the United States. I want a parade." And we got it. And it wasn't the most impressive event from a technical standpoint. I love seeing happy, smiling people waving to our service members, appreciating them. But in my opinion, that isn't what Trump wanted. That isn't what Trump was expecting or hoping for. I served in the Air Force. The Army is not my branch. I just want to get your thoughts and your reactions to this military parade.
So, first of all, I am very proud of the Army's history, 250 years, a year older than the country, and it is something that should be commemorated. So, I've been to a bunch of Army birthday balls and cake cuttings, whether we were deployed or in home station or whatever. And that is important because, it reminds soldiers, just like the Marine Corps, the Air Force, and the Navy, that you're part of something so much bigger than your individual self. And you're part of a team. And that's why we commemorate those things. So that's something that deserves to be commemorated. The problem is that's the way it was done and what the president and the secretary demanded. That's not who we are. I mean, we don't march very well unless you're in the old guard or a cadet at West Point. Generally speaking, we just don't march, and that was obvious yesterday. And especially that environment where you had music that was not military music with the drum, boom, 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 where you can march to it, uh, made it even worse. So that was embarrassing, and I feel terrible for these guys who were out there and. That had to be a part of this. And it also, I think you have to put this parade in the context of the last 3 weeks. I mean, if you look at the president's basically grabbing the California National Guard without working through the governor to supposedly save Los Angeles from an invasion, and then they bring in a battalion of Marines who had not been trained on crowd control. They show up. So this is already a bad, I'm starting to get a bad feeling, and I think a lot of other people were as well. Um, and then the president speaks at West Point at a graduation wearing his red MAGA hat, and it's an entirely inappropriate speech for the commissioning ceremony, or graduation ceremony, for about 1,000 brand new officers. Um, and the whole thing was just, it felt like a campaign event. And then the real hammer was the speech at Fort Bragg, where, again, wearing a red MAGA hat, they were selective on what troops were there, and he spoke at it as if it was a campaign event, and you had soldiers that were booing or cheering as if this was a campaign rally at things the president would say about Governor Newsom of California or the criminals crossing the border. These kinds of things entirely inappropriate. And they were selling MAGA merchandise on post. And here, I blame the Army leadership. I had zero expectation that the Secretary of the Army and the Secretary of Defense would have done anything. I mean, the reason they're in post is because they are yes men. But from the chief of the Army on down, and so many of these guys are friends of mine. They are exceptional officers who have deployed to combat 3, 4, 5 times. Um, they should have known that the president would do this. And so they either, and maybe they did push back like crazy, like, no, please, this is armed post. There's laws about this. But they also should have inoculated their soldiers and made sure that soldiers understood, that your oath is to the Constitution, and you can't be drawn into this thing. And one of the things I'm proudest about our military, of all our services, is that Americans have always seen us as apolitical. I think that incident damaged it. So now you've got that, and then on the other bookend is, for the first time in my memory, you've got a military parade with tanks, armored vehicles rolling down the street in Washington, D.C. Now, if all these other things had not happened, I'd be less anxious about it. But when you put it in the context of everything else, it made me sick.
I was shocked watching the C-SPAN broadcast of the parade, and it had corporate sponsors: Coinbase, Palantir, the UFC, Dana White's energy drink. Can I get your reactions to the United States Army having corporate sponsorships?
Well, um, so we have always relied on corporate sponsorship when there's a big AUSA, Association of the U.S. Army, the annual meeting for every October, for example, or if you have a ball at Fort Campbell or Fort Bragg or whatever, you see corporate sponsors. I thought it was kind of strange having it there. The main grandstand, it looked like a UFC kind of setup, not the Army's 250th birthday. And I, it'd be interesting. How was this thing paid for? I've heard the number 45 million, 34 million. I don't know. So where'd that money go? What paid for what? What did the sponsors pay for? It just was in this kind of a setting. Um, I thought it was unseemly.
Can you explain for the audience the danger of politicizing the military? Trump is trying to get soldiers in uniform to cheer him in a partisan political way. Cheer him when he attacks Gavin Newsom or he attacks Democrats. Can you explain for the audience what is the risk? What is the danger of trying to politicize active duty soldiers?
There's a reason that every time a soldier enlists or re-enlists or is promoted, we um, affirm the oath to the Constitution because it's supposed to be in your fiber that this is what we are defending. That yes, in Article 2 of the Constitution, the president is the commander in chief, but Article 1 lays out the duties and responsibilities of the Congress. So nowhere in here does it say that the president, the military belongs to the president, or that we are his. The first time I heard him make a reference to my generals, I thought, what the hell is he talking about? I was a lieutenant general at the time. I said, no, that's not true. My oath is to the Constitution. And I keep waving this thing around here, Jake, because I've had it since I was a lieutenant colonel as a reminder, and I've used it many times to explain why this matters to us, because the military is given authority by the state, by our fellow citizens, to use force. And so there are very strict laws governing how that force can be used. And so, we've always wanted the American people to be confident that the people that had all the guns would not be used against them. Instead, that we would focus on protecting our country, protecting them, and not be drawn into dealing with civil disturbances or policing, arresting Americans, like we saw happen this past weekend. Now, of course, there's always exceptions, but there are laws that govern that. Um, and I think now the politicization of the military will cause people to lose confidence in us as this apolitical, always reliable part institution of America. The military, you'll know this, having served yourself, that for years, the military was always like the top ranked institution in America or second in terms of trust by the people of the United States. Typically above the Supreme Court, above the Congress, above the clergy, above almost everything else, the military. I really worry that we're going to lose some of that.
You mentioned the rioting in Los Angeles, and across my social media, people from around the world, they only see the pictures and the videos on social media, and it looks bad. You have Waymos being set on fire and people in masks waving Mexican flags. But I've been to Los Angeles several times. I'm familiar with the city, and this is a city of 7 million people, and the downtown area is massive. And these rioters were just on 2 city blocks, couple hundred, couple thousand people, and it was over within a night. But you saw the right wing apparatus in the United States just blowing it up, and Donald Trump demanding that the National Guard be sent in, that active duty Marines be sent in, when the LAPD put out a statement saying, no, we've got this, we don't need any assistance. The mayor did not ask for the National Guard, the governor did not ask for the National Guard, and yet Donald Trump, for the first time since 1965 in the Civil Rights Movement, activated the National Guard against the wishes of the governor and deployed them. And then I never really got confirmation of these Marines actually being used. They were sent somewhere for training before being put on the streets, but like the rioting was over before they even showed up. But I just want to get your thoughts and reactions. Trump's nationalization of the National Guard, which is a funny thing to say, and then him attempting to deploy active duty Marines on the streets of Los Angeles to police American citizens.
So everything that we saw in the last 2 or 3 weeks from the Guard and the Marines in Los Angeles, and you've described the actual situation very well. I mean, it was very, very small. And by the way, media could do a much better job of providing some context, to show people what we're talking about when the president says the whole city's being invaded. We got to go save it. And then, you could show a graphic to show where this was happening. And I thought Governor Newsom, who I'm not a big fan of his, but I thought he's done a good job pushing back on all this. But you take that and then the parade yesterday, and what you see is an administration doing things, showing force and strength against Americans, not adversaries. All of these ICE agents, why are they all covered their face? And I think that I can't prove this, of course, but I suspect there's a fairly large percentage of people that are dressing up like ICE agents that are going around doing things that are completely inappropriate. And so he has unleashed his this force that's out there and is normalizing the use of force or displays of strength against Americans. Nothing that happened in the last 3 weeks in America is going to cause Russians or Iranians or North Koreans or Chinese to pause and go, oh my gosh, they look really strong. In fact, it's the opposite. So, and I think this is what he wants. The Secretary Noam and the whole terrible incident where they threw Senator Padilla to the ground and handcuffed him. I mean, there's about a million ways a lieutenant would have handled that better than she did, and instead, the handcuff and throw a senator to the floor. Where are other senators, Republicans, expressing outrage about how one of their fellow senators is being treated? I think President Trump has created a culture where this is all okay.
If Donald Trump gives illegal orders to military commanders, whether it's invading Greenland or, a commander of the National Guard, Gavin Newsom obviously challenged the activation of the National Guard in court. He won, and then Trump appealed. So I guess there's a stay on the activation. But I just want to understand. We all take our oath to the Constitution to uphold all laws, but Trump and Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth keep giving illegal orders to military commanders. Now, there was the example of the Space Force commander in Greenland. After J.D. Vance visited, she put out a base email saying that the vice president's comments were inappropriate and Greenland is not our enemy. We are not threatening the people of Greenland in any way. And then she was fired. Basically, she had to resign, probably forced into retirement. So at your level, the 3-star general, do you think the military leadership will hold when Donald Trump starts giving illegal orders like he's already done numerous times? Will these people stand up for the law and the Constitution? Or do you think there will be enough that are willing to just go along with this autocratic coup of our democracy? And Trump is basically a king. The laws don't matter, and he can say and do whatever he wants, and the military will obey without question.
So what should be happening is the top leadership of the military, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, the vice chairman, the the chief of the Army, Air Force, Navy, Marine Corps, the Guard. These are the men and women that should be saying, Mr. Secretary, this is unacceptable, or this is illegal, or we strongly advise you not do this. There's risk involved, and all of these kind of things should be happening behind the scenes, because you don't want something that looks like a revolt of the generals out there. That's not good for anybody. But they should be doing behind the scenes, explaining we cannot do this. This is inappropriate for the president to conduct a campaign rally on a military installation. It's against the law. Or to talk about invading the territory of a NATO ally. That's a violation of a treaty. I would like to believe that that's happening, and it's either being ignored or they're not very convincing. Um, but of course, most of these things are not necessarily black and white, like shoot those prisoners or shoot those civilians, where you would say, no, we're not doing that. That's illegal. It's more wrapped up in some twisted interpretation of a code, federal code, or a law, or explanation. And this is where it gets difficult for senior officers to figure out, okay, how much do I push back on this? And these are all men and women that have made it to the top of their profession, so they could say, okay, I can't do this. There's no way I cannot in good faith execute this policy decision. You're going to have to fire me. And maybe they do get fired. But I think most of them would take that almost as a badge of honor. The problem is the deafening silence of the retired four stars. I have been very disappointed, frankly, that you haven't had all these famous four stars, good quality people who, again, deployed multiple times, sacrificed, years of their life for the country, and now they're silent. And they should be protecting the ones in uniform by helping to build up pressure against these kinds of terrible policies. And I think there's only been a couple of people at the four-star level, like General Clark, General McCaffrey, that have been doing this at the four-star level. I think Admiral Stavridis has spoken out a couple times on things, but really not as many as you would expect. And for whatever reason, now it could be they agree. For some people, it's a tradition. We apolitical, we stay out of it. But I think this is too important. We're at a dangerous time, and it's the wrong time to talk about, well, we just can't get involved.
I Prior to joining the military, I didn't understand how people in the military view time. I only served for 6 years, which wasn't very long, but I served for 6 years and I came in under Obama. I was then there for the entirety of Trump's first term. I then was there under the first year of Joe Biden. So I experienced three different presidents within 6 years. And for people who have served decades in the military, 30, almost 40 years, and they remember, Herbert Walker Bush or Clinton, going back to the 90s. Yeah, time moves different. And I think there's a lot of military commanders or senior military leadership who says, this is temporary. 4 years is nothing when you've already been in for 25 or whatever. But yeah, I agree that this is different. Donald Trump is not a normal president. The orders and actions he's taking are not normal. And I saw your recent posts on Twitter saying, why aren't more, flag officers, retired, speaking out? And is there a concern? Like, is there a genuine risk that if retired senior military leadership started speaking out against Trump, Trump would then target them personally or say, these people are traitors to our country because they oppose me? We should retroactively decommission or fire, demote, or strip them of their retirement benefits. Like, is there a genuine concern that Trump would try to take away, the rights that these officers have earned in retirement if they speak out publicly against him?
I suppose some guys might worry about that, but I look at Mark Milley. The president took away his security right after his inauguration as retribution against General Milley. So he's, there. but you haven't seen any. I have not seen any movement towards bringing him back on active duty and doing some sort of thing. Nor should there be. And if nobody in the Congress, in the Senate Armed Services Committee, for example, if they did not raise holy hell about that, then we truly have reached a place where the Congress is a total empty bottle um, and a rubber stamp. So I think there's always that possibility. I think with this administration and the type of people around him, I would no longer say that nothing is. That I would say that everything is possible. I would have never thought that before, but I would say that that would be unlikely, especially if you had a lot of people that were whatever their political leanings were still step up. The Constitution is the Constitution, and that's what's at risk here. That's what worries me because then we do become uh, my generals and my judges, and instead of being the United States Army, the United States Marine Corps, et cetera.
You mentioned the personal targeting of Mark Milley, but I also want to remind people of the example of former Ambassador John Bolton. I believe he had Secret Service protection because he was the negotiator during Trump's first term for the Iran deal. The Iranians don't like John Bolton and they want him dead. So he was being protected. But as soon as Trump got back into office, he stripped John Bolton of Secret Service protection because John Bolton is critical of Trump. And Trump doesn't care if he's killed by the Iranians. And I just think that's shocking and shameful
Or
that.
anybody else. Anybody else. The reason Ambassador Bolton had it and General Milley had it was because of the hit on Soleimani, the Iranian general that was killed outside Damascus, and the Iranian government, the regime, put a fatwa on them, and I think a couple of other members of the administration as well. So that's why they had the security detail. They would not normally be entitled to one just on their retirement. So that's why they were being protected. That was taken away, and I think just an incredibly petty thing that they did in the performance of their duties. That to have that taken away is very petty retribution.
We're coming up on the 1 hour mark of this podcast. I really enjoy talking to you, but I want to shift it to you and ask you, are there any issues or stories or topics that are not getting enough attention? With Trump, it's always flood the zone. There's so many things happening. Like, what are we missing? What is a narrative or a story that people have already lost focus on that we should be thinking about and we should be talking about more right now?
Well, two things come to mind immediately. We've got the United States has been blessed for decades to have so many allies and countries that look up to us. The NATO summit is coming up next week, not this coming week, but the next week in the Hague in the Netherlands. Um, the alliance formed in 1949 has helped protect the United States and our allies for decades, and it's never been perfect. We've had policy debates with every other member of the alliance, but at the end of the day, we could always rely on our allies to be with us. They were with us in Iraq and Afghanistan and Bosnia and all the other places where we are defending our shared values. Um, it's under big pressure right now, and I think the summit coming up in The Hague in a few days, we need to watch it. The president correctly has put pressure on allies to do more spending, to invest more in their own defense. You're going to see, I think, probably an agreement to go to 5% of GDP. That's incredible. That's terrific. But everybody's going to be holding their breath that President Trump doesn't come in and blow it up. Um, they're not sure. And if cohesion in the alliance is not, ironclad, then the risk of somebody making a bad calculation goes way up. So this is one thing I think we need to keep our eyes on. The second thing is that the men and women of our armed forces are out doing their job every day. Maybe we don't march so well and maybe some of our retired and even some active duty people are not living up to their responsibilities regarding the Constitution, but the vast majority of men and women are doing their job. I see troops here in Germany, uh, Air Force, Army, seeing what the Navy has done in the Mediterranean, in the Red Sea, the risks that our Air Force takes, our Marines take. Um, they're doing their job, and they're doing their absolute best, and they're loaded with talent, and they are still the envy of all the other nations in the world. Even if other nations can march better than we can, they all want to be like us, and I hope we don't lose sight of that, despite what's happened in the last couple of weeks.
We probably spent close to half this podcast hour talking about the internal problems in the United States. And to a certain extent, the Russians helping Donald Trump get elected, this is what they wanted. They wanted the attention off of them. They wanted internal division. They knew Donald Trump would cause this rift and distract Americans. So for people who have been supporting Ukraine actively on social media the last 3.5 years, they all know you. They all know your name. They all know your face. You've done all these interviews, and people really admire and respect you, and they want to thank you. I always ask my channel members, what do you want me to tell or ask Ben Hodges? And they always just want to say, thank you so much for your time and your conviction. So what do you want to say to the audience? People who have been information warriors, these NAFO dogs on Twitter or YouTube or whatever, who have been fighting the fight because they believe in democracy. They believe in truth, and they want to see Russia defeated. So what inspiration, what thoughts can you give to them to keep going for as long as it's going to take? Because I think you're right. A year from now, this war might still be going on. It might not look very different than it does today.
Well, I'm hesitant to say, hang in there because, I'm sitting here in Frankfurt, and I don't have to worry about a rocket coming through my roof tonight, or a family member being out there fighting somewhere. So I'm not going to say hang in there, but I am going to say that I am inspired by what Ukrainians are doing, and I ask that they don't lose confidence in American people, even if the American government right now is failing in what it should be doing. The vast majority of Americans believe in Ukraine. The vast majority of Europeans believe in Ukraine. I just came from a conference in Prague with 2,000 people there, and Ukraine was at the front of mind of everybody. And number two in everybody's mind was, what can we be doing to increase defense spending and investment in a sense of urgency across Europe? Because we know that Ukraine has bought time for everybody else. So there are, even though the so-called coalition of the willing doesn't appear to be terribly willing, people absolutely believe in that blue and gold. And I think that, like any fight between two heavyweights, at one point, one is going to collapse. And I think Russia is a much more unstable situation than is Ukraine.
All right, General Hodges, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Hopefully, we'll see you again on the channel sometime soon.
I would appreciate that. Thank you very much, Jake.